I'm going to go ahead and, we didn't do a great job at the last meeting of speaking into our microphones. We did have a few people here, and the recording for the video last time, we didn't pick up all of the comments. So just as a reminder, if you could speak real clearly into the microphone. This one sounds like it might be a little bit hot, but
It sounds good when we watched on the feed though. We can hear you.
absolutely. In general, if you can't hear yourself from the speakers in the back of the room, speak up or speak closer if you could, please.
Everybody got that? There it is.
It feels a little unnatural getting that close to a microphone, but trust me, it helps on the recordings.
Okay, will do.
Thank you.
All right. Cody, if you'd like to go ahead and get started, we'll go to you first.
I will do that. And then Miss Patty, we've got a couple of our consultants that are joining via Zoom. So if you can look for Reese and Jen, they'll be promoted to panelists, please. So while our consultants are getting on the Zoom call here, I'll start by extending a thank you to our planning commissioners. You got a pretty hefty packet delivered to you last Friday with a whole lot of information on our land use code updates. I want to take just a couple of minutes to kind of recap where we've been and the effort that we're looking to do with this land use code update process. As a quick reminder, this commission adopted the comprehensive plan in August of 2021. And the next step in that process is to look at the land use code, which is the regulatory first step in implementing the vision of the comprehensive plan. We've worked in a series of work sessions over the last several months, rolling out pieces of the land use code at a time, chapter by chapter. A few with broader topics. We tried to break it down into smaller, manageable pieces to have the conversation. And the culmination of that is the document that's in your planning commission packet from last week and for tonight's meeting. It's a little around 300 pages worth of code, which is pretty hard to digest. So I hope you've found that the work sessions prior to this, where we looked at those in a little bit smaller pieces, was helpful to understand the broader context of how the chapters interrelate in the overall total code. There are a couple of chapters in the packet that were new that you hadn't seen yet. Chapter 5, you'd seen parts of it, particularly landscaping, which was a big piece of that for our water conservation efforts for the long-range future of the community. Some other sections of chapter 5 include signage, which is pretty detailed and complicated. So that was a little bit new. Chapter 6 has subdivision regulations. That was new for you, but it's a lot of those standards are things that we have employed previously. So we're just looking for some kind of modern updates to that for our new code. And then chapter 7 is non-conformities. You hadn't seen that one before, but it's very much a legal technical chapter for things that we have to cover to address uses as they change over time. And as the code changes over time, structures that were built and uses established prior to new code provisions don't just go away. You don't just say, so long you can't do that anymore. You have a chapter in place that protects existing uses, provided that they meet certain requirements and don't extend or compound the complexities of that non-conforming use. And then chapter 8 was also, you hadn't seen that one in this effort. Chapter 8's on floodplains provisions. Just to let you know, our existing regulations on floodplain are pretty similar to what is proposed in this draft. We did add a couple of new sections, but in large part, the floodplain regulations are consistent with what was in the existing code. And then chapter 9, you hadn't seen it as a chapter, although we'd talked about many of those definitions, and we added a few more based on land uses and a few technical parameters for terms that are used throughout the code. So those were the new elements. The first several chapters. In chapter 3 on zoning and land uses, we talked about several times over a couple different work sessions and kind of dialed it in a little bit more each time. So just to kind of frame where we're at right now, we are considering what is in your packet, the full first draft I do acknowledge that there's a few things that still need to be added to this, and we're working on those elements. But we wanted to make sure we had plenty of time to get the document in front of the Planning Commission to discuss some of the elements. Some of these topics are fairly complicated, and we wanted to have time to go through that before our March meeting. In March, we anticipate that the Planning Commission would be hearing this for a final recommendation to be forwarded to the Board of Trustees for adoption in some form or fashion. We do have a couple of work sessions that we're planning with the Board of Trustees as well, beginning next week on Tuesday. So there's still additional information that we're going to be sharing with other groups. I'm meeting with the Parks Advisory Board Wednesday to share some of the sections on open space, parks, and landscaping provisions that impact our public parks and open spaces. So there's still a few more steps to be rolled out. I'll be meeting with some stakeholders, sign industry, development professionals on some of these sections and getting their feedback as well. But this is the full first draft, and anything can be modified as we need to. But we had to start somewhere and get this document out there for all these various groups to review. And it is on the town's website for public review as well. So we are accepting public comments on these, on this document. There's a Google form or a fillable form on the town's website on the land use code page. And there's a banner on the homepage that'll take you right there. So that's where we're at. As I mentioned, we're proposing that this would come back before the Planning Commission in March for possible recommendations for adoption, and then we'd take it to the Board of Trustees after that. I think we've got our consultants on the Zoom call now, Jen Gardner with Logan Simpson and Reese Wilson with White and Smith LLC. There are kind of legal eagles on this particular project. And that's kind of my introduction on where we've been and where we're going. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to our Planning Commission and give us some initial feedback. What you liked, what you didn't like. Do sections make sense? Do sections not make sense? Please, there's no prescribed agenda for how to go about this, but you've got a lot of information in front of you and we want to hear your thoughts.
Anybody want to give it a whirl first? All right, one kind of basic question, Cody. On the comprehensive plan, you've got to zoom in pretty tight. I guess I just want to clarify the boundaries of the C2 downtown district. Per the comp plan map, it appears that it's Cleveland Ave, north and south frontage, so both sides. It is McKinley north frontage and Harrison south frontage. Is that correct?
Yes, and if I can clarify too, just for explanation purposes, the comprehensive plan is a vision document for the community. It's not a regulatory document. It identifies what the long range opportunities are for the community. So the comprehensive plan does identify Harrison and Cleveland as part of the downtown core. The land use code is the regulatory tool that establishes what uses are permitted. It does not define the districts. After the land use code is adopted and we've got the district provisions identified and adopted, then we would come back and update the official zoning map and identify which parcels fall into which of those land use categories. So there's one more step after the land use code adoption where we can specifically identify if Harrison or McKinley does get rezoned to these new regulations. It is not a requirement that they do. The zoning map and the official zoning map and the future land use map from the comprehensive plan do not have to match.
Okay. Any preliminary talks about what is going to happen with those two? Obviously, they're hot. Let's just start talking about them now.
I think that's fair. As this commission and the board understand, and I'll state it for the public as well. The planning commission and planning commission makes recommendations and the board is the final decision maker on zoning regulations and the official zoning designation for any specific parcel. So at this time, the only conversations have been in the context of the comprehensive plan for what's the long range possibility for the downtown core and the downtown neighborhoods. We have heard some specific feedback during the comprehensive plan process and a few comments during the land use code update regarding what makes sense for these areas, what doesn't make sense, what's desired, what's not desired. And this is our opportunity to dial in on what is intended now in the short term for those areas. And then down the road, if additional considerations need to be brought in, there's other opportunities to do it. My advice would be to, for the commission, if it's your will, to look at things kind of conservatively right now. If you're not 100% sure on it, we can wait. It doesn't have to be done at this time. Our future land use map and our comprehensive plan are long-range vision documents. It doesn't happen overnight. Some of those are opportunities that we want to preserve for the future that we don't want to rule out, but it doesn't mean we have to jump to it today.
If and when there are any zoning changes, we'll follow the standard process where it's noted, there's notice, public hearing, everything associated with what would happen right now if any landowner would request a zoning change.
Yes, so anytime a property is proposed to change zoning designations, it requires a public hearing.
Mhm.
The planning commission can initiate a rezone, the board of trustees can initiate a rezone, and the property owner can initiate a rezone.
Okay.
This can be done broadly with the adoption of the official land use, the official zoning map,
Mhm.
or it can be done on a parcel by parcel basis at the request of a property owner.
Okay, that's how I've seen it in the past. So that's the process that I was familiar with. Thank you.
Mhm.
Excuse me, in regards to that, you said, the town, the planning commission or the, I guess, property owner. How frequently has the town, I mean, historically, or the planning commission actually been the lead on rezoning that as opposed to the actual property owner?
To my knowledge, I can state 100% in the last 4 years that I've been here, the town has not initiated any zone change. In 2007 is when the town adopted the current land use code, and they would have had to have adopted the official zoning map at that time, which may have resulted in some legislative changes across the board. But outside those activities, I'm not aware of any instance where this community has specifically initiated a rezone against a property owner's will.
Thank you.
I guess the reason I asked initially was I kind of went through the allowable uses, assuming that C2 was going to be Cleveland Ave and then Harrison, McKinley, north or south frontage, I guess, is irrelevant at this point. We can focus in on that later, and just kind of came up with a list of things that are allowable in C2 and how that stacks up against all the public comment, everything from the comp plan, everything that we've heard. And I personally, there are a few things that right now that are on that land use table that I would like to see removed from C2. But all in all, I think it's the kind of things you really want to be downtown. If you guys will let me read this list off and just shake your head or, holler or say something, agree with me, disagree with me, that's totally fine. For C2 allowable right now in this draft, we have mixed use dwelling permitted, hotel and motel conditional, brewery, distillery, wine pub permitted, grocery store conditional, farmers market permitted, sit down restaurant permitted, tourist facility permitted, childcare center permitted, convenience store permitted, financial institution conditional, health club conditional, pawn shop permitted, we'll get to that one later, personal services permitted, retail store permitted, professional office permitted, an actual physical brewery, distillery, and winery. I have a couple questions for you on that later, but as of right now, those are conditional. Workshop conditional, college conditional, tech school conditional, civic space permitted, public facilities conditional, medical office conditional, parking facility permitted, or accessory use permitted, and home occupation permitted. Like I said, there are a couple things on there I would strike immediately, but does that generally sound like we want our downtown core? Does that the kind of cluster and the kind of character and the kind of businesses we want on Cleveland Ave, Harrison, McKinley? What do you guys think? Anything?
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Just if anything's stuck out.
I live a
let's do it.
block away from Cleveland. So I spend the majority of my day wandering around one block, with the exception of like a half a block each way is my standard day. So, and I found myself in love with that lifestyle. I don't want to live anywhere else ever other than a downtown. So, and the reason why is essentially from day to day, I have everything I need within walking distance. And I think that's really important for a couple of reasons. The first one, just out of convenience. And then the second reason is there's been studies done, and I can't remember the name of the initiative, but essentially saying that the further away development happens from the center of a city, the more expensive it is for the town to support that. So infrastructure reaching out really far away from town, that's a lot of infrastructure costs. So when we have a thriving downtown, overall, it's very cost effective for a town. And then not only that, but for the people who live there and are wanting to walk or bike or, all those multimodal kind of ways of participating in your town, I think it becomes very convenient. There's definitely safety concerns I have, but outside of that, I love it. If there were a market downtown, I would be there every other day. If there were a bakery downtown, we'd get fresh bread every day. Those are the kind of things that I'd love to do. There's a lot of services we do have to drive for, and unfortunately we have to leave Wellington for, but for the most part, day to day, I don't ever have to drive. So I think that's a beautiful vision of it, and those kind of services and those kind of retail or restaurants is what makes that possible, not just for me, but that surrounding area. So that's how I see it. And that's from my personal experience, and a lot of my neighbors that I've discussed that with too. That's a similar experience that we have.
Real quick, I know we're gonna look at a couple of things that you have there. Just on McKinley and Harrison, in regards to that, why aren't the single family homes listed as the, allowable in the C2 district?
There was a change a couple of years ago that the town made just before I started that specifically eliminated the residential use from the C2 downtown zone district.
Well, right, okay, that's fine, but we're talking about McKinley and Harrison here, and there's a lot of homes there that live there already. And I mean, certainly, what if, we're just this, am I reading this wrong? This statement says, if you're going to change the use of that, or you're going to change ownership, you're going to change things there, it's not going to be a single family home. You can't, can you demo a home and put another home back up?
Well, you asked two different questions there. Let me
Right.
make sure I separate them so I
Sure.
make it real clear. That the first question, as I understood it, was if are single family homes being allowed on Harrison and McKinley, and they're there today.
Yeah.
No one's going to change anything that says that someone has to leave their home. Right. Existing is existing. They get to stay.
Right.
And then the second question was, if someone demos their existing house, would they be allowed to put a new house in? And that's a question that typically it falls under the chapter 7 for non-conformities. If the use is no longer allowed by right, it would become a non-conforming use. So typically that would not be allowed. That's something that we can definitely take a look at. You're allowed to improve your home. You can remodel it. You can add on to it. You can do routine maintenance and all those other things. It would just mean that if you remove the home and it's no longer a home, then that use would not be able to be reestablished because it's non-conforming.
Yeah, see, I thought that we had talked about all that, and we kind of wanted to at least make it on McKinley and Harrison, really, okay, not downtown, but we wanted to make sure that, and I thought that we had covered this ground, that any construction for whatever you wanted to do down there, right now, I believe it's conditional use, I think. We wanted to make sure we were in keeping with the architectural look of townhomes, whether it be a business or not, but I'm a little concerned now that we don't even allow them in here anymore. That kind of throws me a little bit on that one. I'm just talking McKinley and Harrison, not necessarily Cleveland. Obviously, that's commercial, but
Right.
I think somehow we eliminated all that. I don't get it.
What would happen if a house burnt down? Then
It-
are they now non-conforming when they rebuild?
If it falls under the non-conforming status of in chapter 7, and Reese, you can reiterate this too, if you need to. But generally speaking, if a house is damaged more than 50% and it's a non-conforming use or non-conforming structure, then it can only be replaced in conformance with the current regulations. If it's damaged less than 50%, then you can restore it to its existing use or existing structure status.
Yeah, that's pretty right on. And that can change, however y'all want to see it, but that's usually pretty typical in the communities we work with.
Are there examples of other downtown core, like what we would call C2 that does allow single family residences or otherwise primary residences, not necessarily single family, but only for residential purposes? That's a question for Reese, sorry. I should have specified that.
That's okay. Can you repeat the question though?
Is there a reason why we have to exclude residents in C2? Is there any concern with that from general best practices of zoning?
No, to be honest, I don't, it just depends on what y'all want to do. I know for me, I initially put together the uses in the use chart, in the use table. And then I kind of went hands off, and then it went through numerous versions and edits. But I mean, it's kind of what you want it to look like, and we can do it however you want to do it. If you want more standards that kind of fits the area, we can do that as well. I know I'm pretty sure Jen worked on some residential design standards. So that's probably something y'all would want to look into if y'all really want to have single family residences in that particular location. But it really just depends on the community and what y'all want to see. We can do whatever you want us to do and how you want us to do it. Just let us know.
I'm thinking maybe that previous direction isn't necessarily how we're kind of aligned now. So honestly, I see no concern of having residences in C2, but what I would recommend kind of is what I'm hearing is that we should have a separate set of architectural guidelines for that area that with their specific goal of maintaining that downtown look and feel of new houses or any kind of new construction or major renovations. I think that would be fine personally. I don't see a problem with that.
I think it kind of goes back to the boundary definition again. If we're gonna hard stop C2 at Harrison and McKinley, is it just as easy as permitting the residences in C2 and allowing them to trickle into that section? Because I don't know, R4 has its own designation, and that's everything from McKinley and Harrison to the north and to the south. That's still considered kind of Old Town, correct? That was the
Correct.
idea behind R4.
Mhm.
So I don't know that a house on McKinley needs a separate architectural standard than a house on, I'm terrible, whatever the next street south is. I mean, you're essentially in the same neighborhood. So the architectural standards, I feel like could be the same. It's just a matter of just changing the table, I think, to permit the multifamily, single family, attached and detached to be allowed in C2, right?
So same downtown architectural guidelines.
Yeah.
But just
For
have
all of
it.
For R4 as well.
I don't know. I think that would be something to discuss. Something I did hear considerably is that the look and feel of downtown, which I think is really driven by architecture. For example, that last meeting where we're looking at roof lines or porches or those kind of things. I think those align more with a downtown atmosphere than they would anywhere else within the town. So I don't know, but I have seen a lot of separate architectural guidelines for a downtown area versus elsewhere, because I personally wouldn't be against the super modern build within downtown, but I know a lot of people wouldn't be okay with that. So I think they look kind of cool, but I from what I hear and from what I've seen, that wouldn't be encouraged by a lot of residents downtown. So I guess it just depends on the direction of what we envision it to look like and what the neighbors would expect the downtown to look like. It would be beneficial for the town. So I'm open to any, but I think it's a consideration. Also, let's say Drummond's, I don't think this is happening anytime soon, but let's say somebody wanted to live there as a residence, primarily just a residence, and it's C2. So, and there's existing other homes on Cleveland right now. So not even considering those other streets that we're worried about, but there are other residences currently on Cleveland. So should take that into consideration too, like further closer to 6 as an example. So those are beautiful craftsman homes that if they want to use as a residence forever, someone wants to move into that home and have it as a residence, I think that should be allowed. But I would hate for some giant new modern build to be kind of that when you're going into the arch, just imagine if there's like an archway like in Golden. When you go into Golden, they have that big archway that goes above it that like you enter their downtown and it says Golden like that. So imagine if you're driving through there and then there's this modern edgy building is the first thing you see. So I guess just take that as a consideration. Those are giant lots over there. Somebody would be lucky to have for a residence. So if that's what they were looking to do, I don't know if that's the look and feel we're going for. I would say no.
Well, so when you were talking about building, I mean, currently there's a couple plots between the Gators residence and Fifth Street. There's that open field that's been there, and I've been here since 2007.
With the mysterious white piles.
Yes.
Okay. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, don't build there. It's all fill. But that's been for sale for forever. And the question is, my understanding right now is, pardon me, that you couldn't build a residence there. It's not, you wouldn't be able, no, you wouldn't be able to. I don't believe you can. And when you get back to Drummond's, you can have the commercial on the first floor and residential above. That's still, I believe that still works out.
Would be mixed use for C2. And I don't have that in front of me right now, but.
That's page 84 if you're looking for it in your packet, the table of uses.
For existing though, current.
No, I'm sorry. The existing is correct. What Commissioner Whitehouse said, that you can have commercial on the first floor and residential above.
Yeah,
Sorry, I misunderstood there.
maybe I did too. I don't know if that's a question, but
And I was going to page 84 of your packet, which has the table of uses, and the mixed use dwelling is allowed as a permitted use in C2, which would accommodate the upper level residential. And Chairman, I want to acknowledge too that Jen Gardner from our consultant team had her hand raised and wanted to jump in here on a comment. And right before she does that though, I wanted to go back and just kind of help facilitate this conversation. To read to you from page 77 of your packet, the intent that was drafted for the C2 downtown core commercial district. It currently reads, and we can change this if we need to, but it currently reads, the downtown core commercial district is intended to preserve the character of the original downtown and to provide for a mixture of uses that will strengthen and expand the core community, excuse me. As the town's primary activities center, these areas are intended to be highly connected to an efficient network of motorized and non-motorized connections. Its character is based on historic and civic buildings, ample and landscape sidewalks, groomed and activated alleys, public art, and gathering spaces, all designed with a pedestrian scale perspective that gives the downtown a unique sense of place and contributes to community pride. As property owners choose to reinvest in the downtown, Main Street uses should encourage select infill of vacant residential and commercial areas and slightly increase the height of existing buildings to support upper level residential uses. Is that description for the intent of the downtown core consistent with the desire of the comprehensive plan and the commission's current viewpoints?
Not necessarily from McKinley and Harrison.
Understood.
Everything in there is kind of the same feedback I've received through the comprehensive plan. So it sounds appropriate to me. I think if we were to add a residential use into downtown core, though, it would be, we would open it up for a more natural progression into commercial uses, more driven by the actual residents rather than a turnover in ownership or any other significant changes requiring it to go to a commercial use or non-conformance attempting to do that. So I'm wondering if for right now, of course, we don't have the boundary set, so it doesn't matter necessarily. We're not saying McKinley or Harrison at this time. That was more of like a 20-year view of what could potentially happen. That's how the comprehensive plan is, the view of it is. But I think maybe if we were to allow that residential use, then, you know, it would be more gradual potentially, or really just up to the owners to determine when and how that happens. So I think that might be a way to make sure that we accommodate a lot of the concerns for downtown core, but at the same time, not deny what's likely the natural procession of what will happen to allow those kind of uses for the property owners to also pursue their own choice for their property to potentially change it into commercial uses. So I think that kind of respects both sides of it, because saying it can only be residential, it's kind of burdensome to somebody who wants to sell it maybe for development purposes or use it for mixed use or continue that way versus other ones who want to keep it as residential, then they have that choice as well without any concern or fear of the zoning changes if those potentially do happen in the future. So I don't know. I think that's a great meet in the middle opportunity. It gives everybody in the downtown core a choice to choose. So I think that's a good compromise personally. Of course, we don't have the boundaries yet, so we're not doing that part right now. But I guess the other part of it too is, let's say somebody bought a notable building downtown. Let's say they bought Papa's Table and wanted to live there as a residence for primary use. So that would be the flip side of it, is the opposite. If we're using permitted use as residential, there's definitely a loss in like sales tax potential there. And I know that's been a concern for this commission in the past, but I honestly don't personally have any problems with that if that were to happen. So just some things to think about.
Good comments. I don't want to lose sight again of Jen Gardner with a comment from our consultant, if we can acknowledge her.
Yeah, go ahead, Jen. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Actually, Rebecca just said half or 3/4 of what I was going to say. That, you know, really the boundary could be, and I know we're not talking about the boundary right now, but the boundary could be in that alley behind Cleveland and not include Harrison and McKinley. If Harrison and McKinley want to be more downtown neighborhood in character. So when you read those descriptions, just kind of think about that. Also, the city of Fort Collins, I was just looking up their zoning map because I was pretty sure that there are some residential areas in their downtown district, and there are. It's kind of near campus on Howes and Mason. There's several residences in that area that are in the downtown zone district, but they also have what they call neighborhood conservation buffer district that is just the next block around downtown, which really seems to get at kind of what you're looking at with Harrison and McKinley, where those might still be, it's maybe a transition between the true downtown neighborhood and the downtown core. So just some concepts to think about through your conversation.
Jen, will you say that again?
Neighborhood conservation buffer district is what they call it. And they have some different regulations, and it's literally just a 1 block wide kind of buffer right around the downtown zone district. And it could be similar in nature to what we've done with the design guide, the design standards in the downtown neighborhood zone district currently in this current draft, where maybe it's a little, maybe the uses incorporate some commercial and residential in that buffer if you wanted to do something like that. And we could write in some more kind of architectural design guidelines to help support what the look and feel of that would be. So that could be an option to move forward.
Like a brand new zone? Or is that just a blend between the two? Or whatever. we
It
want.
would be, it could be a brand new zone. Yeah, the way that, yeah, I think it could be a whole new zone. Or the downtown neighborhood zone district could encapsulate Harrison and McKinley. And maybe that's sufficient. I'm just proposing that there could be another option here that would provide one more zone district. And it would be a very small zone district, but it would capture kind of that, I don't know the word I'm looking for, kind of the synergy between the downtown core and the downtown neighborhood, kind of transition between the two. But
Couldn't you just make it an couldn't you just make it like an overlay? Because a lot of
you could make it an overlay as well. Yep.
an overlay.
So let's explain that just a little bit, the concept, because I think there's some people that may not be familiar with an overlay district. But essentially for an overlay district, you define a set of standards that are in addition to the baseline zone district. So if R2 is our, most of our single family neighborhoods, most of our new developments come in as R2, an overlay district would propose specific additional requirements for those developments. So it'd be R2 with a conservation overlay. And that in many cases, an overlay district is a little easier to change the boundaries of than changing the baseline district, because you're not changing what uses are permitted. You're just changing the standards that apply to how those districts are developed or redeveloped. Anything you want to add on overlay concept from Jen or Reese? It's high
Nope,
level.
that covers it.
Yeah, it can be as complicated or as simple as we want to make it, but it's just in addition to the other underlying restrictions.
I think those two streets in particular require some sort of give and take, because I don't think the standards for a residential neighborhood apply 100% cut and dry. But then if you expand C2 over to meet Harrison McKinley, the standards for the C2 don't apply 100% cut and dry either. So the overlay sounds like it might be a solution if that's easy enough to work up and write into this thing for the next draft.
We will certainly take a look at that and come back with some proposed options.
Does the overlay still give you the option of making a house into a business?
I think it can. We can certainly take a look at it.
Okay.
I know that was a comment that came up a couple of times in the comprehensive plan process. It certainly wasn't everyone, but there were some property owners that said, given the opportunity, I would like to sell my house for commercial purposes, or I would like to take advantage of turning my home into an art studio for my spouse, or a real estate office or some other use. We definitely heard that, but we also heard the need to preserve the character of the downtown. And that's where we had proposed in this current draft standards for how to do that and limitations on uses. Some of those only allowed as conditional, others with specific regulations on how you do it. So we were trying to find a balance in the standards in this current draft, but we can certainly take a look at an overlay district and propose some options via that mechanism.
Because the C2 should stay, especially on the Main Street part, because we have there's bare lots that are going to become businesses someday. You don't want a house being built next to their shop over there, which could potentially happen if it's not C2. So the overlay, I think, is the only way to go. That way, the people that own the homes have the opportunity, if their house is burnt down or something, to come back and build another home.
Yeah, I think there's one thing I think Mr. Bird touched on it, is that got to be, as he suggested, some people said, well, they would like the opportunity to take their residence and turn it into a commercial use.
Mhm.
So I think that while, again, some of the folks from the downtown core have some very strong feelings about this, I think we need to recognize this. We also need to be fair to everybody. Like, not everyone may have the same opinion about what is appropriate. So I think we need to be general enough when we draft whatever these regulations are, that it still gives people the freedom that, one person's vision doesn't take away the rights of another person, So, I mean, I think was some suggestions that homes shouldn't be above 1 story. I don't know, there's a few on those streets, not many, I mean, the older ones, but I mean, is that a reasonable thing to say to somebody in this area that you couldn't add a 2nd story? Maybe that's how you get the space for your family. I mean, would it be appropriate to tell someone how they could use their property if they wish to invest and make it a little taller so they can put the kids in there? I think those are the types of things you got to think about, so we don't kind of go, yep, we've got it all covered, except maybe there's some other folks out there who have different opinions. That's all. I think it's important to recognize that.
Yeah, point well taken. I would throw out there too another example in that. Let me think of a good one. Put on the spot, I don't come up with a good example, but the question is, you know, on the stories on those buildings. We did ask the question in our downtown online questionnaire about the height of some of the structures, and a lot of those kind of fell in the 2. Maybe some of the downtown residents weren't necessarily in favor of 2 stories, but a lot of our conventional farmhouse, Victorian, and craftsman style homes that were identified as the most desirable land uses there, those do have 2 stories. And so, you know, just being careful, much to what Commissioner Whitehouse was saying, when this commission or the board adopt regulations that say you can only do single family detached, or you can only do this, that's imposing sometimes the most restrictive regulation, and it has unintended consequences sometimes. So definitely appreciate the comments that we're hearing that speak to, let's look for solutions that allow some flexibility, that maybe helps mitigate some of the unintended consequences of simply saying this is the only thing that's allowed. We can't accommodate anything other than this one set of parameters.
Mhm.
I think it definitely bodes well for the community to find a balance.
I have a question. Excuse me. Well, also in the zoning of the C1, 2, and I guess even 3, we have group living and lodging, which there's not a lot of permitted use, like boarding and rooming house. What would that look like? A group home, an Airbnb. So, you know, we've got some buildings and homes on Main Street that those could fall into. The Droman House, obviously one, those houses across the street, even the old hotel, you know, what would that look like? And how are we, if that, something like that wanted to come?
Yeah, so I'll throw out there real high level, and then if Reese wants to jump in too. One of the things that we did hear through some of our questionnaires and comments was that group homes, group quarters wasn't necessarily desirable. There are prior legal precedents that prohibit restrictions on certain types of group living quarters. And so we've tried to balance that in the proposed code here so that we don't inadvertently put the town in a position where we'd be subject to a lawsuit for not allowing something that is otherwise allowed in every other community. And that being said, you know, there's some of those group quarters. One of the most valuable assets that I can see in some of our neighborhoods is the housing authority. And they've got some very specific needs. Then they provide a very specific and needed element to our community that we don't want to write regulations that would unnecessarily prohibit otherwise affordable housing in our community. We've got the housing authority has some fourplexes over by the post office just south of Cleveland and McKinley that could easily fall into one of those categories. The housing authority also owns properties throughout the old town and downtown core. Some of them are adjacent lots that they own 2, 3 side by side. And there may be a desire of the housing authority to, as those homes become older and decayed, they may want to remove a few of those and put in a different type of facility that suits the housing authority's needs. So we tried to be careful to balance not overly restricting some of those provisions for group quarters and attached living that would otherwise be good projects for those specific uses.
do those legal standards not apply to boarding and rooming houses? Because I see what Commissioner Knacks looking at. There's a pretty stark contrast between boarding and rooming house being almost not allowed at all, and then group homes being permitted almost across the board. Is there that big of a legal definition difference between those two?
Reese, do you want to talk to that? Yeah.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. That'll probably be a Mark question. But so boarding and rooming houses are usually uses like maybe like a sorority home or something like a hostile type of living situation, as opposed to a group home is something that is regulated by the state or federally regulated. So those conditions and what you can and can't do, where you can locate those uses are a little bit different as opposed to a boarding and rooming home. So there's been really no precedent established on, if you can prohibit boarding and rooming houses in certain zoning districts, but there are a lot of lawsuits with group homes, and if you're restricting them, where you're going to restrict them, there have been a lot of those types of issues. I know when I was a municipal planner, the city that I was working in, we got into a couple of legal issues with restricting group homes in certain areas of the city, and it became very problematic, and it became quite expensive for the city to deal with. So you have to be very careful with what you do with group homes, and that's something that we know that it's going to take a little bit more detailed, a little bit more detailing to get it right. And I'm pretty sure that as we keep going through this reiterative process, that Mark and some of our other legal personnel will take a stab at this and get you the most appropriate regulations in the most appropriate spots of the town.
Thanks, Reese. So real quick, and while Reese was explaining that, I was going to chapter 9, which is definitions. So real quick, group home is currently defined as a state licensed facility for developmentally disabled, handicapped, seniors or children as defined by and meeting the requirements of a section of the I'm sorry, that was a faux pas from back in the day. Colorado statutes. Kansas has statutes too. My apologies, but it's for protected groups of citizens. And then whereas, if I can scroll to boarding and rooming house, just to show you the difference in the definitions. Sorry, I'm scrolling. Boarding and rooming house is defined as a building or portion of which is used to accommodate for compensation for or more boarders or roomers, not including members of the occupant's immediate family who might be occupying a building. So that's the distinguishing difference there. Protected groups versus for compensation. And then going back to Commissioner Knacks' comments, and I don't want to misquote you here, so please step on my toes if I do. You were saying that there needs to be a different standard maybe for like Airbnbs or short-term rentals and some other types of land uses, whereas we're not necessarily saying that we don't want to allow those protected groups from having facilities where otherwise legally allowable. Is that, I paraphrased quite a bit there.
Right. Well, if you look at hotel motel, all C1, C2, and C3 are either permitted or conditional. However, bed and breakfast is only in C1. And then I can understand the definition of boarding and rooming, group home, what you're talking about. But then we have long-term care facilities, which that must fall under something different than the group home or.
Yeah, and I've already moved away from the definitions. I'm happy to go back, but long-term care typically has a medical necessity associated with it. Alzheimer's care, dementia care, or skilled nursing facilities where there's staff on hand.
I guess I'm just thinking that there's some of the older homes, including the hotel. I just don't think we can discount the hotel. That if they came back and said, hey, we're now the owner or new owner wants to do a bed and breakfast in there. Or, if we did Airbnbs, why would that not be permitted or conditional under the downtown corridor?
I think I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to back to the use table on starting on page 84. Maybe bed and breakfast needs to be a permitted or a conditional use in C2. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I think it can be in C3 too. If somebody wants to build a bed and breakfast on the highway, you know, if we can do a hotel, motel in those, why wouldn't an Airbnb and or bed and breakfast be allowed in those? They should, I think they should be the same.
For C2 and C3?
Mhm.
Okay, we can take a look at that. Like, I'm seeing some nodding. I think one of the things, just to throw out there, and by all means, we can circle back on this as much as we need to. One of the things that we've typically seen is the scale of development, that the C3 is our highway commercial zone. It's typically oriented towards automotive businesses, highway traffic, retail, service type industries. Bed and breakfasts are typically a couple of rooms. They may not necessarily fit with the same style and pattern of that development, but we can certainly take a look at it. We don't want to rule it out. But that was the kind of initial distinguishing difference that came to our mind,
That's fair. That's fair. But I like the downtown.
but permitted in the downtown. I saw some head nodding on that, so we'll make that change.
Well, that's right, because especially on 6, you've got quite the mix over evolution there of buildings. And there's a few places that you can fit a bed and breakfast in there that take on a different architectural versus a brick mortar, So I think in those areas like that, it would work.
Absolutely. And you mentioned 6th Street. That's a great example. It's an area that we kind of struggle with. I think because of the pattern of development over time, we've got a mix of highway commercial, fast food, drive-throughs, we've got residences, we've got housing authority projects, we've got residential conversions to businesses. We've got quite a mix there. So it's definitely one of those challenging corridors that needs some attention.
Just to return to the overlay a little bit. Is it possible that maybe we could see draft language that would include as a zoning districts, an overlay that had essentially all the permitted and conditional uses of both downtown neighborhood and downtown core? Or how would you move forward with that?
So I guess we typically don't do a lot with changing the uses with an overlay. It's usually more of development standards. So maybe can you shorten the question a little bit or paraphrase? Because I'm not sure I've understood the first part of it.
Oh, okay. I guess I'm just interested in seeing the draft language for I don't want to use the word transitional, for the overlay area. So I guess I don't know how that works exactly. So I'd like to see either a sample or your suggestions on how that might work.
Okay, we'll certainly start taking a look at that. And we'll bring it back to the commission for consideration. Just trying to get to the heart of the matter there, and everyone chip in here, is the idea, as I understand it, to look at, in addition to the baseline zoning, we would look at maybe some of those uses would be conditional or require a higher level of approval to, if it happens on Harrison or McKinley, as we've currently kind of identified it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too.
Okay, because that's essentially what the overlay would do, is these uses are, a set of uses would be allowed for all of those areas, but within defined areas where this overlay is in place, there might be a higher level of standard that has to be met, which would require conditional approval or development standards or something different for those specific uses.
Okay, but there wouldn't be additional uses? It would just be higher standards for what's existing in that zoning district uses?
It could be done a number of different ways, but I guess what I was hearing was that for areas that are adjacent to the downtown neighborhoods or Old Town, and between the neighborhoods that are adjacent to the C2 Cleveland corridor,
Right.
that we didn't want to allow all the same uses that we might otherwise in that C2 core. So the overlay could be looked at one of two ways. One, you allow all the uses that the C2 allows, but you put restrictions on it for those two blocks. Or you go back to they're part of the downtown neighborhood district, and within the blocks adjacent to the commercial, you can allow additional uses. So I think it's saying the same thing, but it really depends on how you want to proceed with those couple of blocks. Do you want the baseline zoning to be residential first and allow some additional commercial uses, or do you want to allow the commercial uses and then tailor it back to restrict within that corridor on those two blocks to make sure that it stays a residential character, but allow a little bit of flexibility?
I was thinking the option where it remains whatever the downtown core standards are, so C2 plus additional uses of residential.
Okay, I understand that.
That's how I'm thinking of it. I like your input is great, but that's how, as I was hearing that, that was the solution. I thought that was a good compromise.
To be continued. We're coming up on 6:30. I just wanted to ask if you guys want to take a quick break here before we start the regular meeting. We're gonna go right back into work session afterwards, so. Sorry, Rebecca, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, that's
You guys
fine.
want to take 2 minutes?
I will remember my question.
Bookmark it. All right. Let's do a couple minute break and then we'll come back at 6:30 for the regular meeting.
Thanks.
Thanks, Patty. All right, we'll start the regular portion of this meeting at 6:32. We'll call to order the February meeting of the Planning Commission. Patty, can you do roll call, please?
Commissioner McCaffrey,
Here.
Fredericks,
Here.
Present.
Whitehouse,
Here.
Hammond,
Here.
Knack,
Here.
Sarter.
Here. Any additions or deletions from the agenda?
No, sir.
All right, public forum. It's kind of open tonight. If anybody's here to speak on pretty much anything, you're welcome to come up and speak your piece.
Public forum is typically limited to 3 minutes unless an extension is granted.
They're allowed to speak their piece for 3 minutes.
Unless an extension is granted. It's just a means of keeping it
Enough.
moving.
Please make sure that you sign in with your name and your address.
That's the part that takes forever.
That makes me.
I know, right? My goodness, Christine Gator, downtown core, C2, yay. I know you guys haven't even gotten to it. You guys have just been talking about C2, but there's so much more in the packet. There's the sign code in the packet, which I really don't like because our sign code is 3 pages. And the proposed sign code is now 14 pages. That's a whole lot more regulation on signs, and specifically the temporary signs, the political signs. It says that there can only be 2 next to the street. Yet in this election, we have 4 people running, 4 seats. So that means I can only have 2 next to my street, not all 4 that I want to publicize. I think it needs to be up to 4 because that's what we have in our town. We have 4 people running. And then the fact that it went from 16 square feet for a political sign to 6 square feet, which is a yard sign versus a banner. So people can't have banners at their homes. All they can have is yard signs. There's a lot of issues with that sign code that need to be looked at that I'm not a fan of.
Thank you, Christine. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on to the next agenda item, consideration of minutes. Anybody want a motion to approve the minutes from January?
I make a motion, we approve the minutes from January.
Second.
Is that me? Sorry. Roll call. There you go. Thanks, Bert.
Commissioner McCaffrey,
Yes.
Fredericks,
Yes.
Keeney,
Yes.
Whitehouse,
Yes.
Hammond,
Yes.
Knack,
Yes.
Sarter.
Yes. All right, any new business?
There's no new business on the agenda for tonight.
Any announcements?
Can I make one? I'd like to welcome Eric Sutter as our new chairman, please. Thank you.
And
Chairman, the only other, another announcement? Oh, I'm sorry.
vice chair.
Linda's the vice chair.
Yes, congratulations to Linda Knack, Vice Chair.
It looks so different now, doesn't it?
I have one other announcement. I was just going to simply state that next month for March would likely be very similar to tonight, and that we don't have any action items for review for the Planning Commission. We do still anticipate work session for land use code, and possible adoption hearing would be the only item that we would forecast for the regular agenda.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Burden. Okay, if that is all the announcements, anybody have anything else before we close out of this and go back to work session? Okay, we'll adjourn the regular meeting and go back into the work session. Record.
Well, that was hard, wasn't it?
I was gonna say meeting adjourned at 6:36.
What a first good meeting. What a great first meeting.
Do I need to do time? Do you want me to do time? Does it make a
We'll
difference?
record it.
You got it.
Bookmark. Rebecca.
Exactly where you stopped in your sentence.
I said, I totally remember. I totally forgot. I was like, what? So we're discussing overlay and how that works. My interpretation when we first were talking about it was maybe different than correct. So, but my understanding of an overlay was the surrounding of downtown core. Well, my thought was that downtown core is an area, but the edges of that downtown core would potentially have, and this is why I said blended earlier, because I don't know if I understand, but maybe that can be represented in however the code is written, but that would encapsulate the permitted uses of both the downtown core and downtown neighborhood. That's kind of how I was envisioning it. So it was a transition between those two, actually literally, where it could have the downtown core uses and the downtown neighborhood uses in that band of area surrounding Cleveland, potentially, wherever the map might end up. And that was a good compromise in my mind for those who potentially wanted to do development for commercial uses on their property, and for those who wanted to maintain residences on their property within that band of area. So kind of permitting both. So to meet the needs of both sides of that discussion that I've heard, and the concerns of limiting it one or the other way. So that was my impression or hope when I was thinking of it. And I don't know how viable that is, or how that works, or if that is even considered an overlay, but that was kind of how I was thinking in my head that would accommodate both those groups. Does that make any sense, Cody?
It does. And I see Jen nodding her head on the camera as well. So we will take a look at that. Mr. Hammond, you have Mr. Hammond?
When you talked last time on this, you mentioned, is it going heavy, the heavy side, or the default would be commercial, then to residential, residential, then to commercial, right? I mean, we were talking about that. On McKinley and Harrison, those are predominantly residentials. In my opinion, it should be weighted residential, and then you come in with commercial on the overlay from that approach, and then you come in with that. I mean, I'm not saying don't permit all those uses, but you've got to come in that way.
Yeah, and I think maybe blending the two statements that I just heard, and I was thinking through this as well. I think one of the comments that I would bring up that we heard in the comprehensive plan process was a desire for some of these areas that are kind of in transition. And I know we've tried hard to eliminate the transitional zone district that didn't really provide a lot of clarity for what was intended. And I think going to the approach that Commissioner Kinney suggested as a possibility, permitting all of the uses of both districts in that area might be broadening that a little bit beyond what we heard from downtown residents for protecting the residential character on some of those blocks. And I think I heard what Mayor Hammond was saying was maybe look at it the other way, where the residential character and use is the allowed use, but with the overlay buffer, if a homeowner brings that proposal for a commercial use, it could be considered as either a conditional or subject to meeting certain standards that we could define in the overlay district. I mean, because that's what I heard, and I definitely respect what Commissioner Kinney was saying, but I do have a little bit of hesitancy from some of the comments we heard before that would broaden the number of uses to where it doesn't provide homeowners or property owners with a clear, well, what could locate next to me? But we will certainly take a look at this
Yeah.
and draft some language with some options for consideration.
Sounds good. I'm much clearer on what we're talking about now. So this conversation's helped me a lot. So appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. We will definitely take a look at it and bring some ideas back.
As
Yeah,
I was
absolutely.
thinking about it, I was wondering, is there a geographical area? We're talking McKinley and Harrison, but is that only one side of the street, or is it both sides of the street? Is it center line? Where is it? Because, I guess over on McKinley, there's some beautiful homes there. And gee, would I want somebody to move in with a commercial business right next to me? And so, one side we've got the park, the other side we've got nice houses.
Yeah, and traditionally, best zoning practice is to not change the boundaries or use requirements at the street. You transition on backyard property lines so that you don't walk out the front door and you're out of your home and you're facing a commercial storefront. And driving down the road, you don't have a division of houses on one side and storefronts on the other. The back property line is a better place to transition the land use type because you can provide screening, fences, landscaping that help the backyards feel like a backyard, and the commercial business might have just a little bit of green space and some vegetation. But then that person, the homeowner, can still enjoy their backyard for a backyard and not be facing, a commercial storefront. So the proposal would be that the district would be on both sides of either street if there's any change that's made. And we can look at the overlay and define it that way, that the overlay would be both sides of a street to make sure that the same provisions apply to the both sides. I think to Commissioner Frederick's comment also, when you mentioned geography, I would suggest that there's also something to be looked at for east-west, that a couple of blocks adjacent to 6th Street, McKinley doesn't extend past 4th Street. And so those 2 blocks from 4th to 6th have a completely different feel and are much more commercial. And then the housing authority complex then does the blocks between 4th and 1st Street. Same thing is true for Harrison on the north. You've got properties that are along 6th Street that are currently residential or currently zone transitional that are more likely to become business type of use on 6th Street where the traffic volume is higher and has higher visibility. So within this land use context, the zoning code sets a set of regulations and parameters for these uses. And then the zoning map, the planning commission and the board have the ability to look at, do those standards make sense for this parcel or this block or this half a block? I mean, we can really use those 2 tools in concert to dial in and make sure that we get the right fit for the right properties.
Cody, do you mind? Like, I have like a little experience with kind of what they're talking about as a municipal planner in the city that I once was in. It's a little bit different, but I guess it kind of hits on what everybody's talking about. I don't know if it's within our scope or within our timeline, but it's just an approach. You mind if I share it and pull my screen up and show it?
I think you're getting a lot of head nods, Reese. I think that'd be good.
All right, cool. Let me see if I can figure out share screen. Screen 2. Can you see this map that I got going on?
It's getting there. We've got a little bit of a delay, but yep, we can see it now.
All right, so the city of McKinney it's where I used to live and work. It's a large city, large suburban city. They have a traditional land use code with conventional zoning districts, and then to preserve their downtown, they have a specialized zoning code. It's kind of like an overlay essentially, but what they do is they have certain character districts, as you can tell up here, and the city is kind of allocated in different portions where they provide those transitions. And so within each little character district, they have different standards that apply, and they have a use table that's associated with it. And I'm going to pull that up real quick. So here's the map right here. Each character district has its own summary of what's intended to be there. Downtown edge, downtown core, and kind of like it depicts the streets and the geography of all that. And then if you keep going down, this is the uses. They have a use table that kind of gets a little bit more focused on those specific areas. And so it's different from their use table in their other part of the city, but this is just a use table that's only applicable to this downtown area. And so as you can tell, each use is not permitted in each character district. And so they go about with different standards, regulations, building requirements, setbacks, and all that for these different uses in these different character districts. And so when y'all were talking about this is the first thing that I thought about in my mind about regulating the areas y'all are talking about. Once again, I don't know if this is something that's within the scope and the timeline, and if we have enough, manpower and work hours left to do this. But this is a very, it's a very receptive approach to the downtown area. A lot of people are happy with it. I was responsible for administering it and regulating the city of McKinney's downtown development. And I can say it works, and it provided a lot of flexibility in certain areas, and it provided the appropriate transitions that people were wanting to see within their neighborhood. So this is something I thought about, and it's something I have a practical experience with. So I don't know if it's something you would think about doing or something y'all would want to implement, but just something to think about.
I feel like that's exactly what we're talking about. But this seems so much a larger scale and maybe more complex and required, but
yeah, this is definitely a lot more involved than what y'all would probably want to do. This is like 7 or 8 districts. The city is about 260,000 people and rapidly growing. Wellington is not 260,000 people. But this is something that I just thought would resonate with what y'all are talking about right now.
exactly the visual I was hoping to understand. I think the goal is just a more gradual change between downtown core and downtown neighborhoods, and then understanding how to show that, I guess, because but still maintain all the needs that we determined through the comprehensive plan, but just to give more flexibility and within those areas for that transition between those two. So I think that's kind of how I see it. It's almost like a heat map of commercial, almost is kind of how I think of it. So, I mean, good luck to you guys for coming up with something to show all those completely random statements, but I do look forward to seeing it because I think this is a great compromise.
Yeah, I think I would certainly, I understand that this is obviously a much bigger municipality and a much more complex situation, maybe more moving parts, but I mean, conceptually, could we apply something like this, not as big of an area, but would that give us, again, the flexibility and the specificity to address this? And like so I'm just thinking about the concept, not the pages and pages of stuff. That's all.
Right. I definitely understand that and appreciate that maybe Wellington's circumstances aren't ready for the full proposal, but I think certainly the framework is an example that could be built. And maybe this is one, maybe we're defining one character district as Reese's example points out, but it could establish the framework to easily plug in new character districts as the town grows. So we'll definitely take a look at it. We do have, some goals for timelines for getting this established, and this is a pretty big undertaking, but we'll take a stab at it, see where we get. And I'll throw out there too that if time doesn't allow on the time frame to get the current effort concluded, the town has budgeted for a downtown area study in the current year's budget, that could be a primary lead into that next effort, that, we go conservative on the code adoption process now if we don't know exactly what we want, knowing that other study can help identify some more parameters and help dial in that larger process a little bit more. We definitely don't want to rush into something that we're not ready for, but there's other opportunities in the future to get that dialed in.
So we could go through and adopt this, assuming it all checks out by March or whatever the time frame allows, everybody's happy with it, and we public hear it. And then you guys could continue to work on, maybe it's the overlay, maybe we break out districts, whatever that is, can be created and then adopted at a later date. That's no problem with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess to put it in context, you've got, close to 300 pages of code, and our suspicion is that there's definitely still some topics that need some more vetting, but there's a lot of this code that is, a regulatory framework that's tried and true, that brings our current code up to a modern standard that really will help the community. If there are a couple of items that need further vetting, we can still do those. We can come back and amend this code at any time. It's not a one and done. We can continue to work on it. We just would encourage some cohesion on the initial adoption for the framework, getting the pieces, the parts set in place. And then if there is additional work needed for one component, we can come back and tackle that as a work session with the Planning Commission at any time.
I had a, please go ahead.
Nope, because I was gonna put it into the C2 Harrison McKinley conversation. So if you got it, do it.
No. It's about a different subject. It was about signs. So.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No.
Yeah,
So
you're good.
I guess I'm looking at this, and I think, Ms. Gator made a comment about those are all the people running. There's 11 people up there. So is under here, it says 2 signs like camp. I mean, is that realistic? Could we carve out an exception? Because is this not a First Amendment right to be able to say, I want to put up for, I don't know, 4 people, or whatever you're, and a mayor, that would be 5, I guess, or however it works out. Is that reasonable for the standpoint that in this particular case, like an election, that does not, I think I'm looking on what page of the packet? It's 179 of the packet is a chart. Is that a reasonable thing to think about? That
Well, signs are a great subject, and I have spent a lot of time working on sign codes. And Reese has done some. Mark White is the kind of nation's, maybe that's too broad, but one of the premier leaders in land use law as it relates to sign codes. We have a lot of confidence in what Mark has proposed. It's very similar to other sign codes that I have written. Just to kind of, since this is still pretty new subject matter, to give you just a kind of a broad brushstroke to start things off, there was a Supreme Court case in 2016 called Reed v. Gilbert. It's an Arizona case. In that case, the question that was called was whether or not regulations on signs could examine the content of a sign to restrict it. And the courts largely determined that you cannot read the content of the sign to determine how you're going to regulate it. So the example of political signs, you'll notice that we don't really say you can have 4 political signs. We just say temporary signs, because who are we to say if you will have political signs or real estate signs or birthday party sign or special event sign? And that's the root of that case, was you can't treat these different types of speech differently. Municipalities can regulate time, manner, and placement, size, how long it's displayed, where it's displayed. And so the question, if there's 4 political or 11 candidates running for local office, do we want to allow 11 signs? One of the major reasons for sign regulations is to limit proliferation of signs, so you don't have an entire street covered in temporary signs. It clutters up the neighborhood, they blow away in the wind, they become traffic hazards when they're placed in sight vision triangles. That's one of the leading examples for why you restrict the number of signs. And so if the question is how many candidates do you have and how many signs are reasonable, your staff can't read the sign to enforce how it's being applied. So you could have, if you allow 12 signs for 11 candidates, someone could put up 12 signs for the same candidate or any combination thereof. So the question really comes down to what is the reasonable amount of signs to display on one property? And to that
I don't have an
end,
answer to that.
I don't either. And to that point, I don't think that there is a right answer. It's a what does the community feel is
Well,
appropriate?
you're down to 2 though, if I'm reading that right.
Correct.
That's what this is
I didn't-
currently written.
Last election, the election before that, I think the 4, something like that. I don't know what it was. I saw 4 signs or 5 signs. I never really saw 10, you know. That'd be a lot. I mean, that seems pretty low.
So what's your recommendation? How many?
Well, Cody, I can speak a little bit. I know we just did a sign code in Shawnee, Kansas. It's a suburban city outside of the Kansas City Metroplex. And it's a bigger town than Wellington, but I believe we put 9 temporary signs because they were very they had concerns with this particular issue, and they had to figure out what the right number for their community was. And I believe it was 9. It was 9 or 7, and that's what they went with in their code, and that's what we wrote their sign code. And I think it was recently adopted within the past month, or it's about to be. So it's a good example for us to cite. But once again, like Cody says, it's what the community feels is most practical. You know, if you're in a community where everybody has 1 acre lot homes and 5 acre lot homes, and maybe 20 signs is appropriate. But if you have a lot smaller lots and there's a smaller geographic scale of a town or jurisdiction, maybe 4 or 5 signs, maybe 2, maybe 1. It just depends on kind of what the right number is for Wellington.
And thanks for that context, Teresa. I will share in my last community where I rewrote a sign code, the balance that community found was to do a number of signs allowed per street frontage. So a corner lot would have additional signage because they've got 2 streets that they're putting signs out for. They did restrict the square footage for temporary signs to 6 square feet. That's a pretty common size or it accommodates the most common yard sign type sizes. That community specifically said they didn't want to have large banners, or in Kansas and in our community, we had we had a lot of 4x8 sheets of plywood put up between T-posts. That was a typical means of displaying a sign, and that our planning commission and our city council did not want that anymore. So they specifically limited it to 6 square feet, which would accommodate the wire stake yard signs. One of the other distinctions that they made, and again, under the context of the Reed v. Gilbert case, where you can't scrutinize the content of the sign, my last community adopted regulations that allowed for additional signs during an election, meaning you can always have 2 yard signs up and it can say, Go Derby Panthers was our football team there. Here it'd be Go Wellington Eagles. You could have those 2 signs up almost in perpetuity, as long as they weren't falling apart. But during an election season, defined as 30 days prior and 7 days after, you could have an additional 4 signs. Doesn't matter what you put on it. In theory, you would put candidates' names on those signs, but it's not a requirement. It could be, Christmas party or whatever. But during that period of time, there was a bonus allowed to accommodate the desire to post additional signs for political campaigns. Can't call them political signs, but you can allow a bonus during that period.
We didn't make that accommodation in here anywhere. I don't see.
Well, this is a draft, and
Oh,
we started with
Okay.
something that this is by all means not saying this is what it has to be, but we had to start somewhere to get the conversation going.
6 square feet is a 3x2 banner, right? Okay,
Yeah,
not a 24 by 18 yard sign.
Well,
So it's
that's,
larger.
that's true. And that's what Commissioner Caffrey is saying is my experience as well, that 24 by 18 is the typical size you see for wire stakes. And the example with 6 feet would allow for a 2 by 3 or a 1 by 6, depending on, or anything in between, to allow some additional options. And we can change that number to different specifications if we need to.
I think it does need to be bigger because if you think, for example, Chamber, Main Streets, the town promotes events, which are temporary signs and banners, and those are significantly larger in size. And those are like on the skate park fence, for example, you see those as you go by. So I don't know. I assume all temporary signs are all temporary signs, regardless of who's putting up a temporary sign. And those are very useful. Also, if we had one of those, the traffic ones where you have the different writing, the wording, the digital signs, what are those called? The
Digital
on
signs.
trailers, digital. So, the digital signs, those are pretty significantly larger too. And those are definitely temporary in my mind, that they would qualify as a temporary sign.
Yeah, we can look at that. That's not how they're currently defined as we've
Okay.
proposed them.
All right, I
Those-
wasn't sure.
Yeah, those digital signs would typically fall under a traffic control device as opposed to they are temporary.
Yeah.
I guess the exception would be, I don't see them so much these days, but you used to see the marquee signs that were put out that had the changeable letters on them that you'd see.
Oh, yeah.
Like the big arrow with the lights that says, firecracker stand this way, and it's up for 60 days or whatever.
Uh-huh.
That would probably still fall under some definition of temporary, which we could define as needed here, but I don't know that that is the intent of.
Right.
I mean, I'm open to what the community feels is right. I just don't know if that's the right fit for the type of sign we would expect to see in people's yards.
No, I would hope
Now,
not.
these the type of signs we're talking about right now don't require a permit, right?
We could write that either way.
Well, because Rebecca was referring to the signs up on the fence there that are larger for the chamber or for the main street or the special events. They're
Recreation
larger for a
center.
reason. They're trying to get people to go to these events. Can you make those be permittable somehow? And I mean, what's written in there now says it has to come down within 72 hours after the event's over. And I think that's understandable.
Mm.
But is there a way to do a special events permit? Or is that going against the code saying you can't legally do this because now you're saying this is different than this sign?
Well, it can be addressed in a couple of different ways, right? I mean, we can go anywhere from no temporary sign requires a permit as long as it meets the, time, manner, and placement requirements, to my last community, every temporary sign was permitted. And it's anything in between. So we can take a look at some different options based on what you see as the right fit.
I'm just trying to come up with a way that on that one particular fence we're talking about, the skate park, it's usually just special events that are up there, and there sometimes can be 4 by 20 banners, which is a pretty good sized banner. It takes 5 or 6 people to put a banner up like that. And it's probably going to blow away before the 72 hours is up after the event. Possibly, it may still be up there, but there's got to be a way to allow those folks to do that versus allowing Wyatt to just put up signs all over town, and he doesn't have to have a permit for them because he's doing it the right way. There's got to be a way to allow a larger sign up on that one, and it's the only place that people do it. I can't think of any
Yeah.
other place.
Right, and the location that you're referring to is the chain link by the basketball goals, which is public property. It's the park property.
Right.
And so it's public entities that are placing those banners and signs there for public messaging. We haven't really addressed that idea in this draft, but I mean, it's possible that it's on public property, so not just anyone can go and place a sign there. Maybe public messaging signs are a different standard, or signs
There
on
you go.
public property are subject.
I'd go for that.
I would need to work with Mark White and Reese on this one to get some clear language guidance behind that, but that's something we can look at.
I'd like to pursue that for sure. I do like the maximum square footage. I think that is good because if we're talking about temporary sides, limiting it to say 5 and all 5 of those are banners, that it's not a great look and it's kind of intimidating, to be honest. I think if there were an entire fence covered with political banners, for example, I don't think it's very welcoming.
Any public comment before you make this decision? Let the town of Wellington also be included. Is there a certain time we can come for public comment and have?
March,
the town-
yes, ma'am. The March
Will
planning,
be decided right now?
this will absolutely not be decided. This is a straight work session. We can't decide anything tonight if we wanted to.
Thank you.
So, yep. You're welcome.
Yeah.
So the way it's stated right now, that banners can only be up for 72 hours. Or a sign. Obviously, that doesn't apply to politics. So how is that not going?
So you're referring to the a temporary or special event sign?
Well, a temporary, I think it reminded, I read it said a temporary banner can only be up for 72 hours. And then you have to take it down. to put
Right.
it- And I don't know how long it's gotta be down before you can put it back up.
So the current language is temporary signs placed in conjunction with an event shall be removed within 72 hours of the conclusion of the event. During campaign season, the event would be the election
Right. but
unless
what
a
just-
different standard is set.
What about just a banner that's on a fence? So it's not really for an event, just for anything. That's
45 days. Yeah, that's 45.
okay. I thought I read 72 hours somewhere.
You did. It's in a different section for.
I thought I read,
for-
oh, okay, because I read it in 2 different places. I read that one, but
We'll double check too. We'll look for it,
Okay.
make sure there's not a discrepancy.
I like the election cycle overlay, if you want to call it that. I think that might appease a lot of pushback against the sign code here if we just make that concession for an election cycle to make it work.
Well, I think it's actually reasonable because of, I mean, just purely this example that
Absolutely.
yeah. So again, I mean, I think those suggestions that
Well, and typically you put up an election sign for a candidate that you support. And if you get one vote, how many votes are you? I mean, there's a reasonableness factor there that do you put up a sign for every candidate when you're only supporting one or two? And
it's kind of goofy.
it can, and I've heard both sides of the argument that some individuals in my last community said, doesn't matter who's running for election. I just want people to go out and vote. So I want everyone to know which candidates are available.
Yeah.
And totally understand that. It comes down to community preference.
Guess you could put up a 6 square foot sign. It's got all of them on it.
Well, that's an option.
So are we thinking that as written would be fine for year round and then up to what for election times?
5, if we pick 5, that would
Didn't
cover
you
this.
say we can't do that?
We can,
We
set-
can't specify.
We wouldn't be able to regulate the content, but the example that I have used in the past, and we can check with Mark White, who's one of the industry leaders on the subject matter. What we had done in the past in another community was to say during this window of time, you can have up to this higher number of signs. Doesn't matter what you put on the sign, but during that time, you could have additional signage.
The code just wouldn't specifically be able to say political candidate, anything along those lines, just an allowance for
Right.
additional signs.
Yep.
Like in October and November, you could have 5 for sale by owner signs in your front yard if you wanted to, if you're selling your house. So wouldn't matter on the content, just that during that time you can have more. Tell all your realtor friends.
we just can't get anywhere near the content question. It's
Right.
completely neutral.
Right. And that was one of the topics that I've looked at in the past, and it does come down to community preference again, but real estate signs, it's a temporary sign, it's under our sign code. How do you restrict how long a retail sign is up or a for sale sign? I mean, typically we want people to be able to sell their homes, so we wouldn't want to restrict that, but we have to be fair and comparing all the different sign types. And so, there's a couple different ways you can look at it. We would need some guidance on what the preferences here for Wellington community. And there's a number of ways we can propose some different solutions. Going back to the permitting question, that was a big topic that our staff didn't really want to be involved in
I don't blame
permitting
them.
real estate signs because things change pretty fluidly and some are up for 2 days and some are up for 2 years. And it was a difficult thing to propose, and we didn't want to slow down the realtors on being able to put out their information and replace the sign if it got damaged and things of that nature. So we specifically chose not to regulate real estate signs in the sense that they were defined to placement, number, location. And if your house is for sale and you chose to put up, Christmas party Sunday, what you put on that sign is up to you. Most people tended to put for sale signs on the sign when it was property for sale.
Cody, what did you say about the time frame? Like you put up your sign, okay, you've exceeded your 45 days, I guess. You take it down one day and you can put it back up?
It's defined with its consecutive days. So if the sign comes down, then it would not be subject to that. It's I think it's days within a calendar year. Is that right, Reese? Or I'm trying to find the section that's in to answer the question. I can look for it here.
I think it says one temporary sign on each lot without any, a sign user may display one temporary sign on each lot without any time limitation. All their temporary signs may only be displayed for 45 days or less per calendar year measured cumulatively per sign.
So 45 days in a calendar year.
For additional, so the first,
Right,
it sounds
for-
like the first one's free, so doesn't that pretty well take care of the real estate signs? They're allowed to post them indefinitely until they become in disrepair.
Yes, this would.
I can't see that for a yard sign that you want to get anywhere near permit. I mean, talk about an administrative burden and a complete and total pain in the rear end. I mean, no one's going to follow it. I mean, you can't even get people to get a fence permit. So I'm just, yeah, I mean, I don't think we want to go down that route.
I was just trying to solve the banner part on that screen, but he solved that. So we don't, yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to do any type of permitting for a sign, especially when the coroplast signs in Wellington, they blow away anyway.
How about size limitations then? I would really not like to see plywood up in people's front yards.
No 4x8.
Yeah, I don't think that's a great look, to be honest.
It's too big.
So I think 2x3 is a nice sized banner. If you're throwing it all in for one, I think a banner would be nice. I don't know. Any other thoughts on that? So we can give them the feedback for that piece.
I tend to agree with you. They look kind of silly in a yard if you did plywood. I mean, unless it's a temporary, very temporary, but 1 or 2 days, but that's obviously not really specified in here, so.
I'm inclined to agree with the 2x3 unless we had a provision. I mean, just thinking out of the box during election time or something. You could have one, maybe, we have more signs available and maybe one sign bigger.
You think about what a 2x3 banner, 6 square foot. I think it'd be big enough. Let's say you hung something on your garage door at your shop. It has an air conditioning special or something when it's closed. Is 2x3 big enough for that? Would that even apply?
I'm in the counties. The shop's in the county, so it's a moot point.
Well, I'm talking about her shop. Yeah.
Oh.
So many shops.
You're not.
I'm not in the county.
I mean.
But I understand that's because if you want a sign up there, the sign does have to have a permit. And you do have a sign,
Free deal or weekend deals or something?
right?
That has to have a permit?
No, you wouldn't have to have a permit for a 2x3 because that's what the code says. So,
I mean, that is an option if you extrapolate that a little bit further. If you want to allow a 2x3 sign for whatever content message any time of year, as long as it meets 2x3 and the location, maybe some mounting requirements so it doesn't blow away in the wind. If it meets those certain provisions, it's always allowed. If you want to go larger than that, for a special event or whatever, you could obtain a permit for it.
Okay.
That's an option we
agree
can
with
look at.
that.
And then more square footage for when election or whatever that time period is, because they don't want five signs that would be within 2 by 3. So a larger square footage during the political season to match the larger quantity of signs.
So
Just the permit for anything
maximum-
larger, period. Election season. or
including
no.
during that window.
I think so.
I don't think we should try to permit anything associated with that could be political signs, so.
But you're not permitting the wording, you're permitting the size and the placement, right? If you want a larger sign outside of the 2 by 3, you get a permit for it.
Yeah.
Town doesn't care what's on it. If you want it, regardless of what season it is or whether it's under that special provision. Permit for larger.
That's similar to how the current code is worded. Our current code has a lot of problems with it from a defensibility standpoint. But one of the provisions currently is that if you want an increased size, you have to obtain a building permit for it. We've only done a couple of those. They're not very common, but that's an option that's in our existing code. So it'd be preserving that option.
So what about some of our businesses that do quite a few of them down Main Street that are doing the, what's it called? Yeah.
Sandwich board signs.
Yeah, signs. And they're pleasant looking. They do provide valuable feedback. And, we want to try to help our businesses and promote our businesses. So I think we need to be careful on that one. Because I love seeing buy one cupcake, get one free.
Those are the A-frames.
Yeah.
Or free beer tomorrow.
They're 24, usually 24 by 48 on both sides.
But what would
Two
the,
sides, you get 2 different sides.
so after 45 days, would they take the sign down? But they do change the content on
I
that.
mean, they probably bring them in at night, right?
Yep, repeats
So
every.
they don't actually, it doesn't actually apply.
Also,
If
that's
things
one
are $200
temporary
to
sign.
$300, you don't want to leave them outside and so we steal them.
Mhm. It does say one temporary sign on each lot without any limitation. So they could have that as their one, and if they have another one for pickup drop off area, like we have right now, then that would be the second one possibly.
I mean, I definitely have some signs up, too, that are smaller. Just kind of thinking that through, yeah, pickup drop off or.
If you remember, those are kind of a special occasion. Those didn't exist 2.5 years ago. And hopefully they don't exist in another 2.5 years, but
Yeah,
there's only one reason those are there, to help the restaurants.
and I put a sale up. They come in every night. But some people do keep their sales out and you've seen them, they're really tattered and worn out and
Yeah.
fly off and they're an eyesore. So, I mean, I keep our stuff pretty clean, but I don't want to see things ripped up either.
Right. Well, it's under the same time, manner, and placement. So I think we've got a table that identifies the time and the manner. The placement currently is anything on a private property. Anything in the public right of way or on public property is not allowed. There was a question or a comment that was made about not wanting signs to become unsightly or damaged, or the flag sale signs become tattered and torn. There is a provision in here that says that if temporary signs become damaged, tattered, or unreadable, they may be removed by the director or the designee. So like our code enforcement officer. The table is for temporary signs is also currently set up by use districts. And, we can change that duration of display based on the district. So if there's a, time, manner, and placement, it could be possible to write it in such a way that A-frame signs that meet these dimensions and are placed within the public right of way, no more than, no closer than 2 feet to a curb and doesn't block a pedestrian pathway or ADA accessibility. I mean, you can write a lot of locational requirements in there, but you can put the duration of display continuous. There's different options for how to do that as long as you're consistent throughout the district. And I think there is some room to say that the downtown commercial has a different standard than a residential district because of the needs for advertising a business. So we can look at some different options for that. Is there any kind of general guidance you'd like us to pursue and bring back? We can write a lot of things to be defensible as long as we know the intent.
I would think there's some general guidance out there. This is nothing new here. You know, this is typical signage.
Yeah, but it's our feedback. So
Okay.
how do we want it? I mean, that's what we're doing, right? Okay, I've heard political seasons, additional.
I would say, yeah,
allowances.
additional signs for political seasons.
Yeah.
And we were talking back and forth about allow one no limited temporary sign. Is that what we were talking about?
Maybe
Up to
that's
2 by 3?
maybe that's 2 for C2.
Oh,
If
that's a good
businesses
point.
want to put two sandwich boards or a sandwich board and the curbside pickup sign, we could just, we could write
Per
that in
zone.
that C2 district allows 2 temporary signs unlimited.
I think
Or-
I'm down for that.
We look at the corner lots too. You know, my business for one, I have a corner. So is it one per street side?
Mm. All good questions. This is why it's so
I mean,
complicated.
Longer
because-
accessibility for people with disabilities either.
Oh, right, right.
But regardless, the signs can't be in the site triangle or
No.
a certain distance. There's
Correct.
has to be required safety
So
placement.
I'm thinking street side because the Wellington Grill. Okay, we've
That's-
got a lot of those that, you know, we're gonna say one and you have to pick which side or that. Because like you said, we can't just put everyone on the corner because then we're in a pedestrian cross or whatever. So I'd almost like to say commercial and, I mean, maybe residential, you know, one sign, whatever that number is on each street corner.
We'll take a look at that. That is something that I've employed in the past, was that corner lots get 1 per street frontage. And there are some lots out there that have 3 street frontages.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, the intent was basically if one street's the same as another, why would you not be able to see that sign or that message? So we can take a look at that and see, we can look at different district standards for residential versus commercial districts. We'll put some more thought into this and come back with some other ideas. Having heard some of your comments.
Okay.
I have to ask this because it's always been a topic in the past, but is there any specific feedback on inflatable signs? Blimps,
I'm having a hard time
balloons,
understanding what an inflatable sign is.
inflatable sign.
Why? It'll just blow away.
A balloon?
Well, that's one of the
Like in the-
concerns.
The little whoop, whoop.
You've seen it on model homes that put the big balloon up on the,
Oh,
the
okay,
super
now I
long
understand.
tether, to the inflatable gorilla on the roof, to
Oh, the
the
doughboy.
wacky wavy arm flailing inflatable tube guys. Those are all,
Those permitted
inflatable
signs though,
signs.
right? Those will be permitted, right?
They're temporary.
it depends on how you define
But
it.
they're
And
more
that's
than 2 by 3.
They're definitely.
right. And so, that's the question. And that's why I bring it up, is because I just, in that matter of a couple of seconds, I heard 3 different opinions. And so the general nature is we can define those in a lot of different ways. And generally speaking, an inflatable sign is anything that's an attention attracting device that employs the use of air either through a mechanical means or natural means to motion activate a sign. And so that's inflatable, like the big pink gorilla on the roof. It's the wavy tube guys. It's windmills and other things that attract your attention to a specific location. Just, I throw it out there because my last community said absolutely nothing of any sort.
Let's just,
And I can see having one of the blow up ones that's going crazy all the time. As a realtor, you want to put that out in front of an open house so that people see it. And then, do you want to get it permitted? Do you have to pay money to do that? Because you're open house, you're trying to keep it as inexpensive as possible.
I'd like to keep it still open for the possibility because even restaurants and retail stores, they're going to have a special event. They're going to have a sidewalk sale, something like that. So as long as it, is not in the line of traffic, especially a sidewalk or, somewhere that's dangerous. And potentially if it's a sign that's doing that, it has to come down at night. I made the mistake by putting a giant Frosty on my roof the first year we moved in. It landed in Main Street. I lost my Frosty. So I would say it just has to come down. But for those special events, you know, that something's going on, a grand opening, I think we need to allow those, you know, or a balloon, something like that.
So for a very limited amount of time, then I would say.
Right, I'm thinking less
Probably-
than 72 hours or
Probably
something.
falls into the special event category that, you know.
I think so.
Must be
Yeah.
removed after 72 hours from the.
Something
event.
permitted. for
I
sure.
can see one that for like Cantina Liquors possibly. We did one when we used to own it. High Country Beverage came in and set up a big balloon like that. And it was up there all day long, but then they took it down at night because they didn't want it to go away.
Mhm. And there are some, you know, the high wind speeds is always a big question with safety, right? That those, I mean, again, most people take down the signs when there's high winds to avoid loss or property damage or other things, but not always, or sometimes that employee who doesn't think about that just leaves and locks the door. And I mean, so there's still some public safety aspects to some of those particular signs. And we can consider that in as great or as little detail as we see fit for the community.
Does this also pertain to like holiday decorations and things?
Decorations is defined, so is art. So like if you're a great example is the murals that have been put up on some of the buildings in downtown. Those aren't signs, they're artwork. They're not exhibiting, you know, this is my graphical logo that's represented by 2 golden arches. It's just a graphic, and I'm thinking of Sol de Jalisco. It's, you know, it's artwork. It's not representing this is the business that's located here. So it does not fall under the definition of signs.
Does it require a permit?
No, painting a building wouldn't require a permit. If there's certain desires for colors or, you know, we don't want to limit the freedom of speech, but there's certain parameters that could be defined. I tend to lean away from it for art, but if it's an actual graphical content, painting the logo or the name of a company on a wall, that would be limited to size, and you can put some other parameters on it.
I would think you'd want to put something on it. some
But
kind of
then
parameter.
we're falling into permanent signage. And that's where we're getting permits.
Correct. A permanent sign would require a
So
permit. Yes.
Yeah, painting our name on the building would be a permanent.
Correct. Thank you. Good distinction. We'll take a closer look at signage and some options. I appreciate the feedback. I also appreciate that there's a couple different ideas out there, so we'll try and present some reasonable options for consideration. I've also spent a lot of meetings talking about just signs, so we'll take our best stab at it and bring it back. It might be beneficial to move on unless there's any other immediate comments on the signage.
Nope.
I'm just wondering about somebody is upset about what's going on in the country, and so they put up a sign in their yard that's political speech, like they don't like the governor or they don't like the county commissioners. What's limited? What's allowed?
If it's within the time, manner, and placement. So if under the current example, if there's one sign always allowed at 2 by 3 or 6 square feet, and it has to be on the private property, not blocking a vision triangle, that message can be displayed as long as it meets those parameters.
Okay.
And there are some limitations to freedom of speech. I don't want to dive into it. That would be a great legal conversation someday, but there's a minimum standard for, you know, no profanity, no libel, no unfactual statements. You can't cry fire in a crowded building. There's some limitations on freedom of speech, but they're very limited, and we would not be regulating those.
Mhm.
So moving forward, I guess, for next meeting, I'm not saying we have to end discussion, just
For signs.
kind of move,
Mhm.
move towards that direction here. What else? What would you like to see from us? You've got a pretty healthy list of things to do before the March meeting. any of the revisions that you guys put together, that staff puts together, won't be accessible and won't be out for public consumption until the March meeting. Is that correct? You're not going to release anything intermediary, I guess?
That wasn't the plan to do intermediary releases. One of the challenges that we often run into in code cycles like this is not creating so many drafts that people can't follow along with what's going on. What we'd like to do is, and this draft was just released on Friday. And there are some members of our community that may not have seen that information yet. What we'd like to do is leave this up and collect comments, take the feedback we receive from the Planning Commission and continue to work on this. We will track all the changes. What we'd like to do is use a tracked changes version where you can see strike throughs, additions, changes, revisions, maybe some comment notes explaining why the change was made. We'd like to track all of that and then resubmit so you can see this is what the first draft said, here are the changes, and then we'll also provide a clean version. This is similar to how we did the comprehensive plan. Tracked changes, clean version, so you can see what it would look like and all the changes that we made.
So right now you can go online and do the Google form to provide your feedback like today. It's already out there. I know you're asking about that, so please participate. Thank you.
What's the
Is
duration?
that the only way to participate is the Google form?
No, I can speak to that. Currently, the public feedback can be provided via the form that's on our website. If you want to reach out to me, I'm the planning director, and I can take any comments via email, phone. I can sit down and meet with folks if they have specific comments. The Planning Commission will conduct a public hearing that will be advertised, and it'll be in this format. And we can take public comments verbally. The Board of Trustees also conducts a public hearing, and the Board of Trustees makes the final determination on adoption. Their public hearing will be advertised as well in the newspaper and online and other sources.
So if I call you and I leave you those comments, what happens to those comments beyond you listening to my words? What happens next? So that it gets out to the other people and gets out to the community.
Yeah, so it depends on the nature of the comment. If it's a, hey, you made a typo and you need to fix it, we're going to fix it and they'll see that revision.
Well, sure.
If it's a broader topic,
Pretty redundant. I mean, I would guess that. But I'm saying if I'm saying a comment on something that's really important to me and important to other people in the community, and I want that heard, and I call you and I say, okay, this is what I want to talk about, where does it go from there?
yeah, it depends on the nature of the comment, but if it's substantive to a topic, then we're going to write it up as either here are some proposed options, this is what we heard, and we'll present that back to the Planning Commission for consideration, and then the Board of Trustees as well.
Okay, so that will get back to the Board of Trustees and come to a meeting like this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Cody, I have a couple other questions. So I just keep kind of going through even the uses in the zoning district, and I kind of did opposite of what Eric did, where Eric, you kind of defined what is C2. Well, I went at everyone I went, well, why not or why so? With those, can we just send those to you? Just the thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would encourage that.
I mean, I've got like 5 or 6 of them,
Mhm.
and they're not anything that are big, but just like, why isn't that one in there?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And I fully respect and understand that it's hard to cover everything in one night. But I also don't want to lose sight, and much the similar comment that was made here. If I get 10 comments on one topic and everyone has 10 different opinions, you can't really write a revision that addresses that. So to the extent that Commissioner Knack, if any of those comments are worthy of discussion here, where we could get some consensus or buy-in or feedback, that'd be helpful for us to bring revisions back that address the need. If we get, again, my example, 10 different comments on the same subject, we're going to have to bring it back as, here's all the feedback we received. Now, what do you want to do with it? So one way or another, you'll be talking about it.
Is there any other major topics that you needed our input on?
We would be open to any comments regarding any sections. As I kind of started the presentation with before the regular meeting, we highlighted a couple of the new sections that you hadn't seen yet. And then you had seen many of the other sections once or twice before. We've tried really hard to dial these into at least a good starting point for consideration. We don't expect that we've as a staff and consultants have hit everything exactly right for the community, because that takes community engagement to understand what the needs are. But we do feel like we've got a good start. We've got a defensible document. Our staff is going to be continuing to go back through and make sure that references are correct, that if there's, changing one section of the code can have implications in other sections. So we'll be looking for those, making sure that there's consistency and continuity between the sections. Definitions are updated and valid and current. So I've already seen a few formatting things that we need to go back and correct numbering and things like that. So we're going to be continuing to work on the document cleanup, but overall, this is a defensible document from a legal standpoint. We've tried really hard to be transparent with some of the zoning topics. The downtown neighborhood still needs some work. We're going to look at some options there. Signs, we need to do some more, bring some things back. You might look at your subdivision regulations, chapter 6. A lot of those, the procedural things are, the requirement in subdivision ties a lot to design standards. And then there's a process that outlines how you get to that point. So those are interrelated. Just kind of looking through subdivision regulations, and do we have that section dialed in? Are there changes that you want to discuss? I think there's enough there to certainly give you guys some time to think about it. You might look at the use standards too, or the development standards. There's some things in there that we had talked about in prior work sessions. There's a few new things that we've tried to kind of encapsulate feedback from the comprehensive plan and from prior discussions in our work sessions, but we're not going to pretend that we've got everything exactly right, but we have a good starting point.
Go ahead, Christine. 3 minutes.
Food for thought, maybe talk about the churches because they don't line up with the entertainment facility indoors.
We can cover that now, since everyone's here, if that's all right, Chairman.
Yeah, if you're ready to roll on it, go ahead.
Well, I can point out what we currently have in the table of uses. Scroll to it. We did talk about this before, so we've tried to encapsulate that feedback. We are proposing currently, this is on page 87, if anyone wants to look, it's at near the bottom of the page. We're currently proposing to allow religious land uses in all of our residential districts, except for the manufactured home park. There's really no sense there. But in any other residential use, allowing residential uses as a permitted use, maybe conditional in agricultural uses. And then on the commercial side, what we're proposing is a conditional approval in C1 neighborhood commercial. And we are proposing permitted in C3. We did not propose allowing religious uses in light industrial or industrial just because of the nature of those land use mixes. Religious land uses and assemblies next to cabinet makers and manufacturing and processing equipment didn't make a lot of sense to us. And C2, we didn't propose it as a permitted use based on lot size and availability. There's just some practical limitations to meeting the off-street parking requirements that we didn't think would be feasible. So that was our starting point, but we're happy to consider other ideas to work into the code recommendations.
I think my only suggestion would be maybe conditional in industrial as well. Only because I feel like we talked about this a couple months ago when Pastor Brewer was in. Not every religious organization is necessarily looking to build a brand new building or move into a 10,000 square foot existing structure. You see a lot of churches start on the end of a strip mall in a rundown commercial area. So I know we don't have this currently, but if something were to go out of business in an industrial area in Wellington, I feel like not permitting it at all is limiting. So maybe at least conditionally list it. That way they at least have the chance to talk it over and apply for a permit and see if it makes sense.
We can consider that. One of the things that we typically look for as a staff is if it's a conditional approval, what are the conditions for review? And typically one of the first conditions you look at for a land use is it compatible with the surrounding neighbors? And that's goes back to my initial starting point. And we can look at some different options too, but typically in an industrial park, your uses are manufacturing, heavy equipment, noise, odors, vibration, other things that are not allowed anywhere else. And is that the location where you want to encourage assembly uses? I don't see that very often in zoning codes. We can take a closer look at it, but that was the initial consideration is, does it, as a conditional approval, is it almost dead on arrival based on the surrounding uses? But we can definitely take a closer look.
I would argue that all that happens Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, whereas
Yeah, I like conditional
Opposing.
use in light industrial, sure. I
Yeah.
don't-
It just-
Vacant lot, can fill it with something. It's rent.
We'll take a look at it for sure.
agree with the other listings. Anybody else on religious?
Workshops.
Yeah, right, right.
Wellington Waterwise Landscape and Irrigation Design Manual. It's very comprehensive. And it looks fantastic. So I like everything I'm seeing there. I don't know if anybody else has any input on that.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that, but I agree with you. It looks great. It's come a long way. Thank you.
Thank you. Jen or Reese, were there any sections that you think would be prudent to discuss tonight, and I will sheepishly say I'm not afraid to assign some homework for review. I know that you guys have busy lives. And we appreciate everything that you dedicate to the town as volunteers. But I won't think twice about asking you to give it some further thought and send your feedback to staff.
Yep.
Jen or Reese, any topics that you think would be worthy of considering?
The only other one that I can think of is that conversation we've had, Cody, a few times on another application process for kind of a special review that would be between conditional and permitted. And we did include some language in chapter 2. So if you guys could take a look at that and kind of think through it. And Cody, if you want to explain a little bit more about what the background on that process for them.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. That's a good topic. So one of the things that we were trying to come up with a good solution for was when we have an application or land use type that doesn't really fit the mold, and the example, or not that there's one example out there, but the type of scenario would be something that needs to have, a detailed level of review and scrutiny, but may not require a public hearing. So particular types of land uses that maybe they're allowed in an industrial district, but would create kind of a community fervor if allowed without some sort of review process. So just kind of looking for some mechanism or procedure to vet topics that need that higher level of scrutiny that don't automatically require a public hearing. I was just looking for the same. Jen, do you recall what page that's on?
No, it's at the very end of the application. Let's see, page 64 of your packet. And it's also, there's some information on it at the beginning of that chapter. Let me get up there. In the table, the procedures table on page 13 talks about that it would be staff review.
So we've got our planning commissioners looking through that, and I'll I'll read a little bit of the, or not read it, but I'll highlight some of the points just for the audience and anyone who's tuning in at home. The special review is, as Jen from Logan Simpson had mentioned, we're currently proposing this as an administrative approval. So in other words, it would be a use that's identified as a permitted use, meaning we think that's okay from just a general land use standpoint, but it has specific standards that maybe they only need to apply for a building permit, but it needs to be evaluated for screening, smoke, does it meet the air quality standards? Does it have adequate access and transportation needs? So it's identifying whether it's a special review process conducted by staff is currently proposed to evaluate whether it's compatible with the surrounding developments. Does it need to have additional landscaping or buffering required between uses? And we identify proposed, it's all draft, but a procedure that includes a pre-application conference with staff, a land use application showing what's the proposal, what are the implications, show a map with the site and these other standards, and any kind of preliminary building plans. It would be similar to a site plan review process, but for something that wouldn't otherwise be a site plan review. So staff would have a chance to make sure that it gets vetted in the way that it needs to, if it's not otherwise going through another process.
So I think you're asking us to take a look at this because I'm kind of, I spent about 4 hours reviewing this document today and I'm just about there. So if this is homework, I'm good with that. But I'm just about done. So.
Understandable. And I'm fine with that. And for any section.
One quick question, but yes, I'm going along with what the Commissioner Whitehouse said. Real quick, why would you make a pre-application conference optional for conditional use? See all the questions that come up later and all the problems we've had with these places that want to do conditional use. I mean, wouldn't you think that you would want to see those?
And we typically do. Are you looking at the table at the beginning there?
Oh, I'm down here and I'm in the procedure area.
What's the section number, Mayor?
Well, I'm going to get there. 64, page 64.
Okay.
And it's just on the pre-application conference at 2.24.4E. The pre-application conference is optional. I don't know. I think I just see a lot of, we've been a lot of meetings, Cody, over the last years. I think people need to I think they need to go the extra effort to make sure things are right. So we just avoid all these delays and problems and talk and all that kind of thing. That's.
Yeah. I think to your point, Mayor, we're going to go back through and make sure that that wasn't a copy and paste error. Just because the section there is under special review and the procedure references conditional use. I think we just missed a copy and paste. But point well taken.
Yeah, and the table at the beginning of that chapter does have conditional use and special review as required pre-application conferences. So I agree with Cody. I think we need to make sure that the language is reflecting that.
I just cherry picked that dude right out of there.
Good.
You just found it right away.
You can go all night with this.
I thought you reviewed it that much.
I've been a big fan of this the whole time too, that if there are very clear requirements that are needed, that there's no reason why staff can't approve those. I think it moves the process along quicker. And if they're so clearly defined and you're just checking to make sure that they've checked the boxes on all the requirements, I don't see a reason why it has to come in front of the Planning Commission, to be honest, if they're just very clear staff approvable kind of items. So I think this saves people time and effort. So I'm a fan of it.
Yeah, agreed. We've already kind of given up some, I don't remember what it was called because it's not on the agenda anymore, the staff review.
Oh,
I know you probably haven't had any administrative review.
Administrative
Thank you.
approval.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we've done recently to allow staff to kind of expedite processes, so do it.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And it is appreciated. We haven't had any recently. The last one that was really a question that came up was the the Blue Federal Credit Union ATM, and we determined that that needed to come back to the Planning Commission for consideration. It's done now, by the way. I'm not sure if they've got it open, but it looks pretty nice. It was just what they intended. So that was the last example that was brought to us that could have been considered administrative review, and we chose not to do that. With what we've drafted here, we did propose some kind of parameters for a staff level review that we would like to enforce, and maybe something as simple as that could fall into that administrative category in the future.
One more thing, at the last meeting in January, the discussion was, or part of it was about blending the planning and zoning with the Board of Adjustments. Is that correct?
What Commissioner Fredericks is referring to, the town attorney had presented some possible language that would allow, well, two things. The primary things were, it was proposing that the makeup of the membership of the Planning Commission be reevaluated to have just citizen appointees instead of overlap with the Board of Trustees. There's some matters there that would be a little cleaner. And then the second component of that was whether there could be some overlap between the Planning Commission and the Board of Adjustments. So the question was just whether or not it's permissible to allow that overlap. They would still have to go through an appointment process by the Board of Trustees, have to appoint to the Planning Commission and to the Board of Adjustments. It just would allow them to consider appointing one individual to both boards.
Okay, so all I'm wondering about is that looking in section 2.04 in here, whether or not when that decision is made, well, then all this section is going to have to be amended.
No, I don't believe that it would. The way the section on procedures is written, the Planning Commission has authority as the commission. The Board of Adjustments has their own distinct authority. We'll double check, but I don't believe that there's anything specific in here that regards the makeup of those boards and commissions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and but to your, just so I make sure I understand completely, if that change is made to allow that change to occur, the municipal code, other chapters of the municipal code would have to be updated to reflect that language, but it shouldn't have any impact on the way this is worded.
Okay, thank you.
We all about good?
Any questions on parking standards?
No more books.
No,
Send them all to you.
there aren't.
We're worn out.
I understand.
Yeah, there aren't any.
I throw it out there because I neglected it earlier. That's in chapter 5 in the development standards, and we had talked about some parking principles and philosophies, but we hadn't gotten the draft to you yet. So maybe that's part of your homework assignment, to take a look at the parking standards and see what we've proposed, if that makes sense for Wellington. And thank you, Bert. I did receive a couple questions.
As you come up with these new things, could you just dribble them out to us in emails instead of dropping 300 pages on us?
We tried to do that, and over a couple of months, we brought sections to kind of think about. Let us think about it. I mean, we don't like to drop big surprises. This was definitely the biggest. From here on out, it will be incremental changes. I will talk with our consultants and figure out if there's a way to get some information out there. One of the concerns that as I mentioned earlier, is I don't want to have too many draft versions out there, that we want to make sure that it's transparent so the public can see all the changes too. So we'll think about that and see if there's a way to do it.
Okay.
Cody, I appreciated the, I scare you there.
For some reason, I have a hard time figuring out who's talking with the microphones because it's coming from back here in the back of the room.
We're not in Kansas anymore.
I know.
The 321 pages, yes, but you defined it well. We've been working on this quite a bit. So, you know, all of it was very familiar to us. And I felt pretty good when I went through it and opened it up. I went, all right, I know where we're at. I know where we're at. So I actually feel like you guys did a pretty good job. Yes, it's a lot of information, but we've been working on it for a long time. So thanks.
Thank you, Linda.
So March meeting, similar format, we'll probably do a work session, keep the regular meeting on the schedule for a possible adoption and
That's where we stand right now. We would propose that there'd be a work session from 5:30 to 6:30. And then we're gonna advertise a public hearing. Doesn't mean that the planning commission has to take action at that time. But we have to provide advance notice. So we wanted to at least do that. We can always continue that hearing to a later date. But the intent would be to have the work session for an hour to go over, basically present, these are the changes that we're recommending, and then open the public hearing at 6:30.
works for me. All right, anybody else?
I would say that we would go out of our way to really advertise that public meeting for the public to come to this meeting. So we can work it out here when we're working on this document rather than send it down.
See stuff. 3 days later. When was that meeting? I didn't know about it.
Yeah.
We'll do our best, and I'll work with our public information officer to get the word out as best we can.
Cool. Hey, y'all, I think we're done. Call for tonight. Thank you.
Thank
all.
you.
Eric, what's for dinner next month?
What's for that? Ask Cody.
I think that was on me.
Domino's.
Good job, buddy.
Thank you. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.